Welcome to the Content Repurposer podcast, where we help authors, thought leaders, and content creators figure out how to repurpose their content into different mediums. And today we have Chelsie Tamms, and she is an artist, educator, and entrepreneur. She has founded Lettering Works in 2016, combining her love of hand lettering with her expertise in marketing. And since then, she has grown her business to offer custom branding, packages, educational resources for artists and small business owners, and wholesale products and merchandise, with all of the mission to bring more creativity into our community and beyond. So, thank you so much, Chelsie, for being on my podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Pooja.
Yeah, so I was just curious because I known you since college. So I was just curious, I know you started in freelancing or you started in your career. And I was just curious, what made you want to make the leap? Because I think when you first start in college, at least as I was told to get a 9 to 5 job. So what made you want to take that shift?
Yeah, I think that because we had the same background and so many people are told, like, get that first 9 to 5 job, that was definitely what I expected to do. But what kind of happened instead was starting to brainstorm and think about what could a business look like. And I really had the mindset of how could I get started on this so that I can do it in like 5 years, not necessarily do it right after graduating from college. But because I had that clear goal and wanted to start figuring it out, I think what actually happened was I was able to kind of expedite that process and start finding the resources that were available to start my own business a lot sooner than I anticipated. And for me, what that looked like was winning startup funding from where we went to college at Bradley University and starting to get plugged into the entrepreneurship community. And I also realized at that point that there's a lot of resources available for students who are interested in exploring entrepreneurship. So I feel like I got really lucky in that instead of going with what I was kind of told of get the 9 to 5 first, work that for a while, and then explore starting your own business, I was able to plug into some of those resources sooner and realize, well, I don't have anything to lose by trying this path out instead. So I was able to make that jump and kind of bypass the corporate world aside from some internships, which really let me just enjoy exploring, could this be the career path and not one that I can circle back to later, but just the one that I can start on and stay on. So it's been a little over 8 years of just staying on that path and haven't really looked back since.
I think it's interesting because it's not really a usual path that most people think of doing, but I think it worked pretty awesome for you. We're able to take advantage of all the resources from Bradley University and be able to turn it into a career that lasts you a long time.
Yeah. And I think not knowing what you don't know, being a student, that's a great time to just like say yes to things because I think as we get further in our careers, we can see some of the roadblocks more clearly to things and we might say no to things because we think they'll be hard. Whereas I feel like I was in a really prime position as a student to just say, well, let's try it and see what happens. And then I got really lucky in that I just had that mentality of I'll figure it out and just kept trying to figure things out as I went along.
Yeah. So how did you get started in lettering? So what did you do in the grant money that you got, or how did you get started in your business?
Yeah, I feel like it really dates back to like even before college when I was in high school. I really got into lettering. One, I guess I can say I've always just liked writing and handwriting. And I do think that that's very different than lettering itself because I see lettering as drawing letters. You don't necessarily have to have good handwriting for that. But that's always been something that's been true for me since I was very young. But fast forward to high school, I first took a graphic design class and started learning about the different Adobe Creative Suite programs. And I really didn't know how to use them, but I knew what I wanted things to look like. So I really just resorted to drawing things, and my lettering kind of started there. And then I would scan those illustrations and lettering pieces in and then make the final design. So that's really like what planted that seed. And then going through college, kind of back to that idea of like a 9 to 5 is encouraged, diversifying your portfolio is encouraged, like learning different skill sets. So I kind of got away from the lettering. I tried to squeeze it in as much as possible, but it wasn't until senior year that I started to like really recognize that there was a possibility to just do lettering as a career. And part of that was due to having an internship where I wasn't sure exactly what I'd be doing. It was a sister company to an advertising agency I'd previously worked with. And essentially what happened was they were like, can you just do this lettering for this summer as like your main assignment? And I didn't realize that could be like a full-time position. I thought it was something that you can incorporate into different projects, but not necessarily do full-time. So all of that really kind of snowballed and built into me realizing, oh, this has a lot of potential. And still those mixed messages of get that 9 to 5 job, like work at an advertising agency, put your time in, all of those things definitely came up. But things fell into place because I had such a clear idea of I've loved this forever. I don't think that's going to change. So what if I start pulling these resources together and build a business? And then how that fed into the grant funding was I feel like it really allowed me to have a bit of a runway in terms of that startup funding and that business, kind of those basics of just not having to take on any project day one of being a business owner to like make ends meet, pay the bills, etc. So it gave me some flexibility to spend time as a working artist and kind of split my time between an artist residency that I had in Peoria and split my time between figuring out how do you build a business. And that flexibility really allowed me to kind of center that lettering piece because I think if I needed from day one to just start making money and to build up clients and pay the bills and not have that flexibility, I wouldn't have as many lettering projects because it is pretty niche and specific. So it took a little while to build that up and find the right people for it.
Yeah, I think it's like what, especially in the creative industry, it's very different on how people get clients or be able to create a business out of. So it's great that you were able to to have the time to learn how to run your business before you had to start having a need to get clients right off the bat. Because I feel like a lot of people need to just get a client, and so they'll just take everyone, and that also comes with a cost as well. I was just curious, when you were starting off, how did you serve your clients?
Yeah, so I would say that I was primarily service based to begin with because that's what I knew from just having, even tracing back to high school. I had made posters and logos and things for everyone around the school and beyond. So it really was centered on services. But I started the products pretty early on, I would say probably just a few months into business. And it was really just like a fun way for me to like see some of those things come to life in like more of a controlled environment for me versus handing those designs off to a client and hoping that they print them correctly or it actually sees the light of day, because of course not every project comes to fruition. So for me, like adding the stickers in was just kind of a fun side thing. And specifically, the first stickers that I put into production was one, a cute little illustration I did on ice cream always being a good idea. And then another one that I had was just a version of my logo as like a little square. And then the third design that I had was a I Heart Peoria, Illinois silhouette of the state sticker. And so that's kind of where I got my start in just like, okay, I'm going to get these and like see what the interest is. And to be honest, I ordered way too many of them and it took a while for them to kind of catch on. But fast forward to now, I feel like I've moved from having a primarily service based business to having a primarily product based business, specifically in wholesale. And I've had to get those stickers remade since then. And I've grown to having like over 200 different designs. So I think that what once started out as something that I was like, I'm just going to do services. And then even moving from Peoria to Chicago, there was a moment where I was like, I'm not doing products. Products aren't for me. Like stickers can be frustrating, which is very true. But then I also quickly learned in Chicago, stickers are very scalable. And so going from selling to the smaller museum in Peoria, which I loved working with when I was there, to being able to pitch to the Field Museum, Chicago History Museum, and they just buy a lot more because they're a much larger museum. So I saw kind of some of those benefits of the scalability of that piece. And I would say where I'm at now is trying to bring some of the services back in. So I want to have that balance of like, I like to put it as kind of fewer, better things. Like, I don't want to just be shipping things all day, which is part of the reason that wholesale really appeals to me, because yes, there is a cut that's being taken by the retailer or the museum gift shop or whoever is purchasing the product, but they're handling a lot of the things that I otherwise wouldn't want to handle because I want to get back to making more art. So I think for me, it's really been an ebb and flow over the years. And what I like about that is it's usually led to me having a good baseline of income that allows for some more flexibility and being able to take advantage of new opportunities and also continuously evaluate where should I be putting my energy, what's exciting to me, and like what feels creative and fulfilling.
Yeah, when it comes to like service-based businesses, I think often we get pressured to do different avenues. Or so for example, like if I did social media, I'm pressured to do like web design and create like a whole agency, and it might be overwhelming. But I think within your example, your main service is lettering, but you're just doing different types of service using the same type of craft but in different ways. And that's just like a great way to find different ways to offer a similar service or something similar to it without feeling like you're overwhelmed with everything. But so if something happens, like let's say a service like is a lot of people are not investing the service, you have something else to rely on as well.
Absolutely. And I think like diversifying your income streams is really important, but you hit on such a great point of there's so much pressure from other people of like, oh, you have to do this, or here's how you can expand. And I think the only person that can answer what expansion is right for you as a small business owner is you. So you have to really take a moment to evaluate, is that the direction I want to go? Because you have to balance that desire from other people, like the demand in the market, but you also have to balance what excites you and what you want to be doing with your time. Because if you let other people decide, then you're just recreating a job that you could get hired for. And it's hard to manage and navigate that, but it is reassuring when you have different income streams that all feel like they're under this umbrella that excites you. Because, like you said, when one kind of dries up or there's less opportunity or less investment happening in that space, you can pop over to the other side and give that some attention and let that be your income for a while, and then kind of go back to the other one and build it up or try something new with it, which I think is really fun and releases some of that pressure of putting kind of all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah, so I wanted to go back, and I remember you saying that you pitched to different museums for your stickers. So how did you even think of pitching your idea for like stickers? Because some that's not something that I would normally consider. So like, how did you come up with that idea?
I think for that specifically, it really came down to a big personal shift happening. So moving from Peoria to Chicago caused me to really reflect on like, okay, what do I want to bring with me? What do I want to leave behind? Because there's kind of an opportunity to reinvent and rebrand yourself when you make a big move like that. And so for me, it looked like reflecting on everything and saying what's working really well. And my answer to that in the product space and stickers specifically was museums and airports. So that became my focus for this is what I want to replicate and do more of in Chicago. And so that kind of gave me that first push. And then it was just asking questions of like, okay, well, if it worked in Peoria, how do I get it to work in Chicago? Step one is I need to pick a museum because I'm going to keep up with what I'm doing in Peoria, but try to grow in Chicago now. So I was really targeting just the community and understanding like, okay, how do people buy here? Because it is different than in central Illinois. It is different as a business that's like 1 to 3 years old versus like 3 to 5 to 8 years old. Like I have different systems and processes in place. So I was really at this good point of I have some experience. I know that these products work well in a museum. And I just kind of put out there to a couple networking groups that I was in, like, this is what I'm looking to do, airports and museums, if anyone knows anything. And kind of what happened was being in a group, seeing that somebody was opening their own small business and like gift shop, and asking them if I could take them out to coffee and just asking like, how do people in Chicago buy? I know you're a new business owner, maybe you can give me some insight. And she connected me with a past contact she had at a museum. That museum did not work out, but she ended up giving me the contact information for the field museum. And I was able to really just pitch to them a little bit untraditionally. I feel like it wasn't like an aggressive, I want to sell this to you, like meet with me, that type of thing, but more like I would like to understand how one works with a museum, having worked with a smaller one. And they entertained meeting with me and ended up purchasing some products from me, and we're a much larger scale. So I think that's kind of how that started. And then just realizing that they're never going to know that I want to sell to them if I don't ask them and if I don't put myself out there. So I think that really opened my eyes to like pitching in general and figuring out like how do you develop outreach as a strategy for your business. And I always say that if you know exactly who you want to work with, ask them or tell them, because there's really a low chance that they're going to just randomly figure out that that's secretly what you want. And sometimes we don't know who we want to work with, so we can't pitch because we have to figure that out first. But because I moved from Peoria to Chicago, I knew exactly who I wanted to target, what worked in the past, and what I wanted to replicate. So I was easily, although I feel like saying easily kind of diminishes all the effort that goes into it, but I was easily able to figure out the next step of, okay, finding out who do I reach out to in this space, and then determining what I say to them and how I show up meeting with them. And it was very casual compared to like a more intense pitch, which I've given since then. Like I've pitched to Walgreens before, and that was like a much more calculated, statistics involved pitch, and is very different than showing up in a way and saying, hey, I've done this before. I want more information from you to figure out how I can make this work. So that worked really well for me, but also has just taught me so much about like, you have to ask, you have to put these offers out there. People aren't always going to come to you. Sometimes they will, but if you count solely on that, you're going to have a little bit of a harder time in business typically.
Yeah, I think that's a hard lesson to learn because I think it's also because there's so many people who overly pitch or are very aggressive with it. So then all our solution is to do the opposite. But then if you do the opposite, no one knows that you want something. So I think it's like an analogy of like if you're hungry and you don't want to be rude about it if you want food in someone else's home, but then if you don't ask, you're just going to end up hungry. So you kind of just have to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you touched on something great there too, with just the fact that there's so many really aggressive, scary salespeople out there. Like I've been the recipient, I'm sure you have as well, of just these emails that are so not thoughtful. They're aggressive. They make you feel bad, if anything, and they get the details wrong. Even they spell your name wrong. Like I've been addressed as lettering before as my first name. That is not my first name. That's my business name, and that's not even my full business name. So things like that, I think, just miss the mark. So to kind of shift all of that and say like, pitching doesn't have to be icky and salesy and aggressive. It could be as simple as you're expressing like your genuine care and interest for a company or a potential client, and you're also trying to highlight how it benefits them. I think a lot of times with the sales pitches that we get in emails and things like that, they do try to highlight what the benefits are, but they haven't done the research to see that I don't need a phone company for all my employees because I'm a company of one. So I think we can get away from that negative stereotype and like all that baggage that comes with it by just being really thoughtful and doing fewer, better pitches that are really intentional. And we did the research and we asked the right questions and we showed them that we're paying attention, not that we're just mass sending out 100 asks and hoping someone bites, but really just like focusing in on why does this matter to you and why should it matter to them.
Yeah, so this brought me to another question. What are things that you don't like in if you ever got an email, what are things that you don't want or you don't like in an email that is pitched, or and then also like what are things that are good qualities in a pitch if you were planning on sending an email or receiving it?
Yeah, I'll start with the ones that I don't like. And I think that's missing details, or like clearly you don't understand who you're talking to. So that's the name spelled wrong, or something's addressed incorrectly, or you're trying to sell me something that if you spent 5 minutes on my website, you would know that I have no need for this product or service. I think those are some of the biggest red flags, missing those details. And the second thing is making it about the person who's pitching. Like, I need to get 10 sales, be my 11th sale, or be my 10th sale, or be number 5. Like, whatever that is feels like about them, and like, why does this matter to me? So if it doesn't relate to me, then I may respond to it, but I also might not, because I don't really know how to respond or how I fit into it. So I think those are some of the like big red flags. And as it relates to people that have pitched me, like, oh, let's collaborate, because I have a love-hate relationship with collaborations. And that's because I think a lot of times they're kind of mislabeled as collaborations, and they're really just requests for free work. It's not something that benefits both parties. So if they're like, hey, let's collaborate, can you design and letter this entire thing, it'll be great. I'm like, why would I do that? Yeah, it would be great, but like, why? What am I going to get out of it? And if it's not payment, it needs to be something else. So that's what I think of a lot of times. And then on the other side, like, what's good is if they can really highlight how I will get benefit out of this. So for example, maybe there's an opportunity to be a speaker at a conference or an event, and they share how many attendees I'll reach, and they share that there's another perk that I'll be able to put something in the swag bag for everyone, and this will help connect me to X, Y, and Z people. Some of those things really highlight what am I going to get out of it, what makes it worth my effort. And then some of the things I've done in pitches, like to other creative people, if I'm looking for that kind of collaboration, is instead of me just saying, I really want to get on the news, or I really want to make this project and get some attention for it, I think about that, and then I move on to the next thing. I'm like, okay, how will this benefit that? I will personally reach out to the news. I will share this. I can't promise we'll get these results, but here are the effort I'm going to take. You can use these photos for whatever you want, if it's for a photographer and they're highlighting my work. So figuring out some of those things, like relate it to that person, and making sure that it's clear what the benefits are. And I think a lot of times there are benefits that we keep in our heads, like, oh, why wouldn't you want to collaborate with me? I have a huge audience and I'm going to share it with them. Well, no one ever said that. So as somebody who's getting the pitch, I don't want to have to research how many followers do you have? How many times are you going to post about this? Things like that. I want to hear those things, like put it on a silver platter so I know, does this help me or does it not? And I think that's the other thing we have to remove from pitches, is just figuring out, okay, this doesn't have to be as emotional and personal. Like, if this benefits them and if I've made that clear, they will say yes. If it's not clear, they might say no. And a no usually means not now. Like, you can try again later, or you can figure out, how do I actually tap into what their problems are, or tap into what their needs are, or tap into some of their goals and things like that. So I think those are kind of two very distinct camps of how you can do it successfully and be thoughtful and prove you did the research, and actually do the research, not just pretend like you did, but like look deeply at their website, figure out what matters to them, and try to connect what you're doing to that.
Yeah, I think you touched on a lot of different things where it's just focusing on creating a personalized message that would benefit the person. And I think a lot of people make a lot of assumptions of what people want. And they also make an assumption that because they want a service that you need, or they're looking for a service that you are offering, that if they try to trade the service with their offering, that it will like even out. But then there's also an assumption of like, it can come off insulting because you don't know how much it costs for that service.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it's not doing that research. And then that's the worst pitch, when somebody says, I'll trade you 10 stickers for an hour of your time. Wait, do you know how much I charge for an hour of my time? It's probably not $20. It might be $200. So that's like an insulting pitch. Versus if you do the research and say, I see that you typically charge $25 an hour for this specific service. Can I trade you, or can I collaborate with you at an equivalent value? And here's what that looks like. That feels like, wow, they are paying attention and I don't have to explain myself. And I think that's where pitches, like if you have to go back and explain and re-explain and re-explain, you lost them. Like it needs to be clear up front where the value and benefits are, and potentially for both parties, because sometimes I get kind of put off by pitches that seem like it's so great for me, and I'm like, why would you do that? Like,
Right.
what's the catch? So if there is a catch, making sure that that's clear in a way that it doesn't feel like, oh, I figured this out too late and I already said yes and it's not good for me. So just being clear and being kind and being as clear as possible in explaining what it is that the other person gets really makes a huge difference.
Right. And I also wanted to know, like, if an author, someone who is like either publishing a book or wants to find ways to brand themselves, what are the certain qualities that they would look for to hire a graphic designer or any type of designer that they're looking for?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. My biggest piece of advice is really to find a designer whose style aligns with your vision, your personality, and what you envision for your brand, what aligns with the genre you're writing in, and just you as a person, because authors, so many times, your brand is yourself. So making sure that you're finding something and someone to work with that really aligns with that and feels good. So you can look at shared values, you can look at aesthetic style, you can look at people that are in shared communities with you. Those are great ways to find people that align really well. And then I think some of the questions you can kind of ask is, what do I actually need from a designer? Because sometimes authors don't necessarily need a logo for themselves. You might just be able to put your name in a really nice typeface at the bottom of your book or top of your book, and that could be all that you need in that area, but you might need a beautiful book cover to really get attention on the shelves. So I would think about your unique situation if you're an author and figuring out, like, what do you need help with? What can you handle? Because you probably don't have the budget to just hire everything out, right? We have to make these choices, and they're hard choices to make. So figuring out how can you add a designer in strategically where you're not hiring out everything. And the reason I say not hiring out everything is because you probably could do that, but you might not be able to afford the quality that your work deserves. That really represents the quality of your writing and your books as well. So thinking about, like, where can you invest really strategically so that it really makes an impact on your brand and your business. So for some authors, that might look like hiring a logo first. For others, it might be making sure the book cover of your first book looks incredible. Maybe for others, it's the second book or third book because you had to kind of prove your concept first and then get back to it. Another thing could be hiring somebody to help with custom merchandise, and that merchandise could get you in front of the right people. And I think for that too, there's so many opportunities out there that maybe people aren't aware of, like partnering with a designer who has a design that already perfectly aligns to your book or your genre or your brand and identity that you're building. You might be able to just license that artwork and use it instead of commissioning something completely original. And there's so many opportunities there. And going back to pitching, like if you have your eyes on a designer that you love, maybe reaching out and saying, here's where I'm at. Like, what can I do to get ready to work with you? Or do you have any low cost options? Or what does that look like? And I do have some hesitancy around saying, like, what are the low cost options? Because if you are hiring a designer, it's not going to be low cost. Doing it yourself is probably the lowest cost. But a lot of times there's ways that we don't realize exist to work with someone. Like, for example, many of the wholesale designs that I have as stickers are available to license or to purchase, either semi-custom, meaning I can change the colors or add an author's name to it, things like that. And that's like the stepping stone to like having your own commissioned artwork. And so a lot of people have those options, and that's something to weigh too. Would you like to hire a designer that costs less and have something completely custom, or would you like to work with a favorite or really well established designer and maybe get a semi-custom or a not custom at all, but you love one of their designs and you can license it? So I think there's a lot of options out there that people aren't aware of until they've had that experience. And I also see a lot of times people hire a designer just for the title and they're not finding somebody whose style they like. So what often happens is you work through this whole project. It's like pulling teeth on both ends because the designer's like, I'm having a really hard time creating outside of my style, outside of my skill set for this thing that you may want, and vice versa. You're like, why can't you just make this thing I want? And I think the biggest tip there goes back to finding the correct designer for the job, putting in that work. It parallels the pitch exactly. Like, do your research, find the right person for the job, and the job will go a lot smoother.
I think it's really helpful, especially to do your due diligence when it comes to working with anyone, because it's going to be a long road if you choose to do other things. So, like for example, like I started looking for a cover designer for my book, and I I know that there's other options, but for me, I wanted to spend a certain amount of money because I was scared that if I spent too low, that they wouldn't have the knowledge of knowing how to format a book or knowing how to like give me the right files so that I can upload it on Amazon and Ingram Spark and be able to have it like properly go through. And so that
Mm-hmm.
was the price that I was paying for, because I was paying for, does this person know how to format a book?
Absolutely. And I think generally speaking, you get what you pay for. So doing that little bit of research up front and just vetting the person that you're working with or the person you're thinking about working with can go a long way. Does that mean it's completely foolproof? Absolutely not. But sometimes you get what you pay for in terms of you can get a great deal, but it comes with someone cutting corners or not having that knowledge and experience and expertise to format things in a way that you need. So figuring out what are your actual needs and how do you find somebody who can meet all of those. And we're all creatives here, so we want to compensate other creatives fairly. And I think that helps build a better culture of like your book has more value when you invest in it. And it can feel really scary to do that. But I've also found that it's really helpful to bring in other creatives, like hiring a photographer for things helped me share my work more happily and comfortably because it wasn't just me anymore. Whereas if you're creating a book, you're DIYing everything, it can feel scary to put that out there because it's 100% of you going out there. It's a piece of you. But if you can hire a designer to work with or a photographer to get really nice photos of yourself as an author, that starts to take away some of that pressure that it's all on yourself and like someone else believes in you. They worked with you, they put their best effort forth, and they can probably take a better photo than you can on your phone if you don't have the equipment, or they can have better lettering for your cover art and your title, or create a cover that like you feel proud to put out there versus skeptical, did I do a good enough job? So I think there's just so much potential there to really figure out what's realistic for you to invest in because it's just going to make your work better.
Yeah. Again, thank you so much for being on my podcast. Is there anything that you would like to promote?
Yeah, so if anyone is listening to this and you feel like I've never worked with a designer before, I don't even know where to start, I have a free guide that I recently put together with all different tips and tricks. Some of these related to what we were talking about and goes in a lot more depth of how to come up with a budget, how to come up with a timeline, and how to work with a designer for the first time to avoid some of these costly mistakes. So that's available on my website, letteringworks.com. And then I also have a free 5-day brand challenge there. If you listened to this and thought, I haven't really thought about my branding as an author, this could be a great resource for you to tap into as well. So much of your brand can be determined by you. So figuring out how to unlock that is a really helpful first piece and place to start if that's where you're at in business. So I also welcome anyone to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can find me at Chelsie Tamms or Lettering Works, as well as Instagram and just through my website. So thanks again so much for having me, Pooja.
Yeah, thank you so much